Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Ms.
Good morning.
Nielsen, and congratulations on your nomination. Thank you very much for meeting with me in my office last week. I greatly appreciate it. Before I get to my first question, I'll just add to the chorus of those of us who have states with a northern border that we are looking for real attention to the Northern Border Report and the improvements we should be making on the northern border. But I wanted to start today just on the issue of really our post-caliphate strategy in combating ISIS. As you've pointed out, as a former DHS Chief of Staff and as the current White House Chief of Staff, you're familiar with the current challenges of the department and the nature of the terrorist threat to our homeland. For the past several years, DHS has been leading the effort to address foreign fighter flows from the U.S. and allied Western countries to ISIS battlefields in Iraq and Syria. Today, the so-called caliphate is crumbling, with the ISIS strongholds of Mosul and Raqqa having been retaken by allied forces. The thousands of foreign fighters who joined ISIS's ranks could form, as former FBI Director Comey put it, a terrorist diaspora that could seek to carry out attacks on Western countries. In your response to committee questions, you alluded to steps that you would take, if confirmed, to address emergent threats and the next generation of terrorist threats. I'd like you to specify what steps you will take, if confirmed, in the first 30 days to address the threat from our terrorism diaspora.
Thank you. So first, what I would do, of course, should I be confirmed, is to speak in detail with the leadership at DHS currently, from intel and analysis and other parts of the department. But in general, I think what we have to realize is the threat has changed, as you've described. So what we see now are more of an inspiration. There's less directed attacks, but they're no more dangerous when they're inspired. The other challenge we face with inspired attacks is we're seeing throughout the world, particularly in Europe, but unfortunately here as well, as recent events in New York indicated, that terrorists or would-be terrorists and people inspired by terrorism use very common items.
So I understand that, just because of our time constraints, what concrete actions would you take? One of the reasons you have broad support is because you've been there recently and you're ready to lead.
Yes, ma'am. So I would say awareness, outreach, ensuring that our intel is requirements-based, moving towards a different model, making sure that we use a JTF, a Joint Task Force-like mentality within the department to make sure that we're leveraging all the different parts, and to be very clear and prioritize what the threat is, making sure that we're addressing today's threat and not yesterday's, the month before.
All right, well, thank you, and I will likely follow up with you on that a bit. I also wanted to follow up on a couple of the questions you've heard about countering violence extremism. You referenced in your answers to committee questions that DHS must increase its capabilities to address terrorist exploitation of the internet and social media for radicalization. Could you you talked just now about the need to constructively and continually build up relationships, but can you tell us a little bit more about how you would actually do that?
Yes. As I understand it, DHS has been, amongst other partners, has been working with the providers, social media providers, internet providers. That is something that I would commit to continue. We need to, in partnership, find the terrorist substance on the internet and remove it. We know they're using it to inspire, to instill propaganda, perhaps to cause confusion, as we've seen in other circumstances. But the internet and social media are particularly vulnerable to such manipulations of information. So we need to work in partnership to remove them.
Well, you also mentioned in our meeting in my office that the need to partner moms and imams, and I just been really trying to get at what you mean by that.
Well, we've heard, and I think what my reference was to some of the different associations, nonprofit organizations, NGOs, international partners that we spoke to when I was at DHS, suggested that they found in their experience as a best practice, the best way to do the community outreach and to increase awareness was to work in particular with those two groups of participants in those lives.
So I just, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but again, time is short. DHS has a unique office called the Office of Community Partnerships that does exactly what you're talking about and what you've referenced in answers to a couple of questions now. But while you were at DHS as Chief of Staff, the number of personnel in that office was cut in half, the grants program was eliminated, and the director of the office resigned. What's more, in your first few days at DHS, you rescinded previously awarded grants made to several organizations. Among the groups that had their grants rescinded was a group of reformed white supremacists who were working to pull others out of violent white supremacist groups, and the Muslim Public Affairs Council, which has a track record of engaging the Muslim American community throughout the country on this kind of issue. So can you tell me the reason why you took these actions at DHS? Specifically, why did you rescind grants that had been carefully vetted? And how does this harmonize with your desire to increase DHS's capability to address terrorist exploitation of the internet?
Yes, ma'am. I think the short answer is it was an attempt to ensure that any grants that were distributed would in fact be effective. So as you know, the awards were pre-awarded, if you will, just prior days to the new administration. What then Secretary Kelly did was put a hold on the award, the final announcement of those grants, and asked the Office of Community Partnership to relook at the metrics so that we could build the metrics in at the front end to ensure that any taxpayer money was successful. So track record was one of the considerations as well. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Track record. But so the question is, what has been done since? Because I would assume that those metrics and that vetting could have happened by now, and it's not my understanding that we have issued more grants. And meanwhile, the office has been, the personnel's been cut in half. So it doesn't speak to a real desire or sense of urgency about this.
Yes, I look forward to, well, should I be confirmed, but just in general, I look forward to hearing about the results of the grants. So they have been awarded, as you know, but it's been 4, 5, 6 months, depending on the grant. So with the metrics are in place, the assessment and measurement will continue. I'm very hopeful that we'll find best practices that we can then scale and that we can then work with this committee to ask for any additional resources, personnel, et cetera, that we would need to do just that. It's a vital part of what DHS does. We just need to make sure we do it in a very effective way.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your answer. Ms. Nielsen, I just wanted to start by expressing my concern about your answer to one of Senator Carper's questions about climate change. When you are in charge of our country's security, when you are in charge of our response to natural disasters, you need to be able to rely on science and technology and consider and assess the science and technology that you are being advised with objectively and put it well before politics. And what I heard in your answer was politics before science. And that concerns me very, very much. As governor of the state of New Hampshire, when we were dealing with natural disasters, one of the first things we did was have Gray Weather Service, the National Weather Service from Gray, Maine, on the phone advising us as to what we were going to see, what we were going to be dealing with. In dealing with security measures, I had to rely on engineers and technologists about the power of certain kinds of responses to possible threats. So just consider this a concern expressed by me that if you are willing to dodge a question when 99% of the world's scientists agree that the primary cause of climate change is human activity, that concerns me about your qualifications to take on this role.
Could I just answer that, if I could?
Of course, yeah.
Unfortunately, I was cut off from Senator Carper as well. What I would have said is that not only do I think the climate is changing, but I think it is vital that we, in response, change our modeling, our preparedness, and responses. Climate change has a direct effect on natural disasters.
Of course it does. But if you are unwilling to acknowledge that the primary cause of it is human behavior, then you are not going to be able to change the modeling appropriately. So what we are looking for is people who are willing to acknowledge that there is a huge and incredibly well-vetted peer-reviewed science that tells us that climate change is primarily caused by human activity. And one of my concerns is many of your fellow, if should you be confirmed, fellow cabinet members are also people who will not acknowledge the primary cause of climate change, and they are often the people who would be advising you in times of considerable natural disaster and threat. And they're not willing to listen to science either. So I'm going to move on to the question that I wanted to ask in this second round, but just hope that you might educate yourself about what science says about climate change and the primary cause of it.
You have my
because
commitment, should I be confirmed, to review the science. Yes, ma'am.
our country's safety really does depend on that. Now, on to election security. I wanted to follow up on Senator Harris's line of questioning because according to a Newsweek report from early October entitled "Russians Still Have an Open Path to U.S. Election Subversion," DHS's high-level outreach teams, known as the Government Coordinating Council, which I think is what you were just referring to, are only just now reaching out to states to assess their election cyber needs. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this article for the record without objection.
Objection.
And it seems that you just confirmed what this article said, which is that DHS has only started to reach out to states' chief election officials within the past few weeks. We are more than a year away from Russia's hack of our election. We just had gubernatorial elections in 2 states yesterday, and we are just months away from the 2018 election cycle. Why did it take so long for DHS to establish this Government Coordinating Council? And what actions did you take as DHS Chief of Staff to help accelerate the establishment of this council?
Thank you for the question and for the opportunity to clarify. So DHS, as I understand it, has been working with states for many, many months, 14, 15 in some
But the question is, as my understanding is, they've just started now to reach out to the chief election officers, which is an absolutely critical step.
Yes, I don't believe that is correct, respectfully, in my understanding. When I was at DHS, we ensured that following on the work that Secretary Johnson did, we established what is called a subsector coordinating council, which is primarily the private sector side, if you will, also has some government folks on it. The GCC is a very specific sister part of that partnership model. That was recently stood up in conjunction with a commission that's really focused on third-party certification of the infrastructure, not the vulnerability, not the monitoring, not the threat and information sharing, which has been occurring since at least prior to January.
Okay, so then I hope you will read this article and we will have further discussions about it. My concern is whether, in fact, election security is really a priority for this president.
It must be.
And did you do anything in the White House to accelerate preparations to make sure that our election cyber systems were secure?
Only from a policy perspective. So again, I didn't have any command or control or any assets at my disposal in my White House job. But yes, ensure that the policy process addressed any risk that we face today.
And are you comfortable that our states will be able to defend against Russia's hacking efforts in the 2018 cycle?
I would like to be in a place where I can answer that in the affirmative should I be confirmed. I can't answer that now. I don't know. I certainly hope so. That should be the goal. We should work and use everything we can to ensure that that does not occur.
So it is a priority of yours to ensure that
Absolutely.
the absolute bedrock of our democracy is protected before our 2018 elections take
Yes,
place.
ma'am. Well in
and we have your commitment, if necessary, to ask for additional funding, to ask for additional resources to work with the states to ensure that when people go to the polls, and remember that there is early voting in many states, they can be confident again that the election systems in each and every state are secure.
We must do it in partnership, yes.
Thank you.